Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending from where you dial in. It's
good afternoon.
Pleasure to have you all. Let's wait one more minute to allow people coming in. It's fantastic to see such a big number, such a big interest for this topic. So welcome everyone. Yes, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Make yourself familiar with the options. It's fantastic to see such a variety of locations dialing in. It's really amazing. South America, Africa, Europe, India, fantastic. Good, then let's get started. Let's kick off the climate classroom for today. I understood it's the second one. And on behalf of UNITA, on behalf of also the Global Platform for Action for Sustainable Energy Displacement Settings, I will have the pleasure to welcome you all on today's meeting. We have a good 45-60 minutes to tell you something about humanitarian energy. And I have the pleasure to share this together with my colleague Joelle. My name is Thomas. We are both from the GPA coordination unit, and I'll explain in a minute what the GPA is. But before we do a little bit of housekeeping, so what we are planning to do within the next 45 minutes is we will introduce you to what we call, in short, humanitarian energy. And when we talk about humanitarian energy, it really means energy in displacement settings, which means for refugees, for example, in refugee camps typically, but also in other settings for where internally displaced people are based, and also their host communities. So we will tell you about what kind of energy is required in these settings, what kind of energy is needed in these settings, what are the key challenges, and also what kind of recommendations we would have to various stakeholders to get engaged, for example, in this topic. Then we muted all of you at this moment in time. But if you have any questions during the presentation, please put it in the chat. We will monitor the chat. And also we have a Q&A session in between the presentation and also at the end. So you will have ample time to ask your questions and also provide comments. And if you're not speaking, then please mute your microphone unless we ask you otherwise. So before we dive into the topic, we would like to do two little polls because we want to understand who's actually online, who is interested in this topic. So we have prepared two questions for you. I'm reading out the first one and I ask you to respond to this. So which group do you, just connect yourself most. So where are you coming from? What is your background? Are you from a development actor or development background or humanitarian? Or are you maybe belonging to a government professional, academia, private sector, or other? Please fill out the poll now. I guess we don't need more than 20 or 30 seconds. Okay, here are the results. Oh, other is the most common answer. That's great. But we also see a fifth of the people online are from academia and from private sector, and a few development and government professionals as well. So that's fantastic. Over to the next question. How much do you actually know about humanitarian energy right now? Did you work in these related areas already? Is it somehow connected to humanitarian energy? Have you heard of it before? Or is it really a new topic for you? That's why you're taking part in the class. Another 20 seconds. I actually have never been in a class with 230 people, so it's quite amazing. Okay, can we get the results? Oh, fantastic. So a lot of newcomers. That's excellent. So we hope to give you a good introduction into the topic. And again, feel free to answer, to post any questions in the chat. Okay, so maybe a few comments just very briefly about the GPA. The GPA, as I mentioned before, stands for Global Platform for Action on Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings. And our mission is really to deliver SDG 7 in displacement settings. For those of you who are not familiar with the SDGs, with Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG 7 is about providing energy access to everyone in this planet until 2030. And our goal, our mandate is to provide also energy access to the displaced community who are often not part of these energy programs right now. And for the next slide, I will hand it over to Joelle.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And it's really a pleasure and an honor for me to be part of this class, and also sharing a couple of things on what is happening in displacement settings. As Thomas, as you can see on the screen, there is an increased number of displaced people around the globe currently. And here you can see the top 10 origin countries of people displaced across borders at the end of 2021. And this is a situation that is really making the humanitarian response, or the humanitarian challenging, especially for those who are working on this, because the number of displaced people keeps on growing, while on the other hand, the response also needs to be growing accordingly, and that's where the challenge comes from. Next, Thomas. Yes, and this is a growing crisis, as I just said, with over 21 million people forced over borders as refugees, and 52 million people displaced internally within their own countries. And the current Ukraine crisis drive these figures up daily, with the increased effect of climate change, and also the continued impact of the COVID-19 and the forced migration due to armed conflicts, also other cause of movements that is really forcing people to move from their own countries to other countries for safety and also protection. Next, Thomas. And here we come to the energy situation displacement context. And as you can see on that picture, it's really a situation that displaced people are really facing, unfortunately, relying on solid fossil to even find ways to cook their food, also addressing their cooking needs in terms of cooking. And from the recent work that the Chatham House worked on and published, it was published that shared with us that 81% of displaced people rely on firewood and charcoal for cooking, unfortunately. And as you can see on the picture, this is how it looks like. Next, Thomas. and also 94% in camp or camp-based refugees have very limited access to electricity. And you can see that those are just lentil torches that are given by humanitarian agencies to refugees for them to be able to even have lights in their household or their houses during night time, and that's the only option they do have. And some of them even live in darkness because of this lack of electricity or energy for lighting in this setup. Next. Now, the agencies serving or supporting refugees also are really still facing the same issue by relying on diesel generators to make sure that they run their activities. And this is costing them a huge amount of money in terms of investment that comes every year and every year. And as you can see, it's now estimated up to $400 million every year that is spent on diesel generators to make sure that they can run their activities and provide supports and protection to displaced people. Next. The lack of clean energy and also clean cooking energy has some effects on the refugee lives and also their body, on their whole entire system, because of the situation that they are working in, also cooking their food in. And it's the situation in displacement is that a lot of, or a good number of displaced people live in very congested situation, whereby they're limited resources, and also they're living in a very low ability in terms of income for them to pay any cooking solution, apart from relying on firewood as their main or basic way of cooking. Next, Thomas. On that picture, you can see smoke from a house. That's a refugee house. And this smoke is just a daily routine that refugees are living in, that refugees has to cope with, to make sure that they just live with, because that's the only solution that they have for cooking. And this is a situation that impacts their life and also impacts their respiratory system, and also causing even chronic diseases because of being exposed to such kind of environments every time during their stay in displacement context. Next. And here we have an example of a clean way using gas for cooking, and you can literally see the difference between the three pictures and what is happening around them. So from the first two pictures, you can definitely understand the situation and how well it's affecting the refugees, and the last one is a good example of what is happening, or what is needed to address the issue, to also make sure that refugees can have a dignified way of making sure that they're also addressing their energy needs, especially the cooking energy needs. Next, Thomas. Yes, now here we have a picture of Bangladesh back in 2017. Next. The same location on the same picture a year after. This is in 2018, and you can literally understand what happened here. The presence of displaced people means like there is a loss of biomass, biodiversity, and also causing a lot of flooding, a lot of problem and health problem as well, because people are cutting trees to make sure that they can address their energy needs, because it's a basic need that they have to respond to, unfortunately, and that's the only option that they have. Beyond that, there is no option for refugees to be able to cook their food properly, and also address the issue of energy needs in the displacement context. And aside from just looking at the two pictures, the two pictures whereby we have green lands, and therefore thereafter we have small houses and deforestation coming in. There is also a tension that comes in every time when there is this situation between the host communities and also the local, the refugee communities, because of these limited resources that they have to share. And also the host community feels like it's a way of not respecting the land, also causing a lot of troubles, and therefore refugees find themselves again in a situation of not finding safety, where they thought they will be in a position to at least having protection. Unfortunately, the result is that they will not have that safety, because the host community will be after them to make sure that they can stop those practices. And it's now a conflict between the local community and the refugee community. Next, Thomas. Again, here we have some examples of cooking solutions that are available in the markets and that can be duplicated from one refugee setup or context to another context. Here we have a gas, clean cooking, and also a mini grid whereby refugees can also use to make sure that they can produce enough energy to cook and also lighting their household. And we really encourage this kind of practices in displacement, because it has proven to be efficient, and also providing some useful kind of environment, and addressing some of the health issues that refugees have been exposed to for quite long, because of cooking on firewood and charcoal, which expose them more, and including the young ones on having some health issues because of the smoke and the environments that they cook, they're exposed to cook in. So this is something that gives you an understanding on what is happening, an understanding on the situation in displacement context, and why it's important to really be aware of that. I'll now pass it on to Thomas to take us through the coming slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. Thank you. And just to let you know, for example, this picture on the right, this is a very new system based on solar technology, solar electric technology. And this little cooking system has a battery included, which can provide up to 5 meals a day for a family on this site. So this is really the new modern cooking solutions which we are advocating for. And thank you for all these questions and comments already in the chat. I scanned through them a little bit. For example, there was this question from Marinata. Apologies if I'm not mispronounced this. It would be useful to get a statistic on how many people have a similar problem with or challenges with the cooking. Here it is easy to say it's about 3 billion people on this planet who are still cooking with similar solutions. So the cooking topic has actually an effect similar to, for example, the aviation industry worldwide in terms of CO2 emissions. So it is a massive problem within displacement settings, but also in other areas. And I want to give you in the next slide a bit an overview why this is a specific challenge also within displacement settings. So the first one is energy in humanitarian settings is not really a priority right now, because the priority is to protect these people who are fleeing from war, to give them shelter, to give them water, and to really serve their basic needs. Energy is often seen as a luxury, especially electricity is often seen as a luxury, especially since also their host communities do have only a similar or comparable situation. So this is challenge number one. Challenge number two, displaced people are often not included in national or international energy programs. What does it mean? If you are living in a refugee camp in somewhere in a country, you often live there illegally or not recognized by the state, or just very temporary. So the areas where the camps, for example, are based are often way off the grid, of the national grid, and because it is so way off in the middle of nowhere, it is often not included as part of the national grid extension plans, for example. Another one is funding, and here I would see it's twofold. On the one hand, energy in displacement is underfunded. That's clear, because in general the humanitarian funding, the humanitarian system is underfunded, so they can barely meet the basic needs with the funding they have, let alone something like energy. On the other hand, as Joelle rightly said, we are operating thousands of diesel generators every day in these settings. And as long as we do this, we also know we are not using the money wisely enough, because when you have a diesel generator, you can only use the money once, because you spend it on diesel, you burn it in the diesel generator, and then that's it. If you go for a solar system, you can use it more often, or you can actually buy the solar system and then it provides you an electricity for the next 20 years. The fourth challenge is there's very limited expertise. So there's just not enough technical expertise in the humanitarian settings, which makes it difficult to plan any solar systems, for example, which makes it difficult to assess the situation, to come up with new ideas, and which also make it difficult to find, for example, models where you can bring the private sector in and let them invest in the situation. And the fourth and last one is we have very limited knowledge about the data or about the situation. We have very limited data to understand more the situation on the ground. The numbers that Joelle referring to from Chatham House, from the latest study, are the best numbers we have, but it doesn't mean they are the same everywhere. So we have these were built upon certain camp numbers and then extrapolated, which doesn't mean that it is actually accurately 81% all over the camps. So it is something we really need to work on in the future to have more and better data here. Just to give you a couple of reasons why we need this. So what are the opportunities with clean energy? Obviously, Joelle mentioned it already, we have these environmental benefits. Second, we want to reduce the cost that the humanitarian actors spend on energy and as well the displaced population. I mean, we are talking about often the poorest people of this planet, and they spend a considerably amount of money if they have an income on energy, because they're already paying, as Joelle said, for firewood, for charcoal, for candles, for kerosene. So we also need to, or we want to, we're aiming to reducing the energy cost for the displaced population as well. Then value for money. There's a study that came out 2 years ago, which suggested for every dollar invested in energy programs, you get $1.40, $1.70 in return. For example, if you replace a diesel generator with solar system, you invest in a new solar system that costs a couple of $1,000s, but then over time you obviously have savings. So every dollar invested, you create another dollar in the future, and in many cases more than that. For example, as Joelle said, the respiratory diseases, if you go to a clean cooking solution, you have less health costs, for example. For those of you who are maybe a little bit familiar with the humanitarian work, you may came across this topic of nexus, bridging the short-term humanitarian work to the longer-term development actors. So this is really about energy. Energy is a bridge between short-term response into long-term development. It's also a way to bring in the private sector. For example, again, replacing a diesel generator. This could be also done by a private solar company, and the private company could then come up with a new system and sell electricity to the humanitarian partners, just as they do now for or with diesel. We also would like to see refugee camps really as an innovation hub, and that is possible with energy. These are areas which are difficult to reach and which are often with scarce natural resources. If we bring, for example, solar in these areas, which would be difficult to bring in otherwise because there wouldn't be any need, then we could actually make these refugee settlements as a kind of innovation hub in their little area. And the last point, which was already mentioned a couple of times by Joel, it has immediate positive effects on women and children. And finally, our sort of call to action, I also saw in the chat, is there a way to get engaged? Yes, we will share with you the options to get engaged. But depending where you're coming from, what your background is, we have here a few options to get engaged. For example, if you go from left to right, quickly, if you are a host government, please include refugees and IDPs, so internally displaced people, in your national energy plan. Create an environment for the private sector to come in. If you are a representative from a donor government or a finance partner, think about how to expand your work into displacement settings. If you are part of the private actors, please reach out to us. Let's just discuss how we can co-design interventions, market-based interventions. There's certainly a business to make, especially when it comes to replacing diesel generators. And to all NGOs and other actors, if you are, for example, running a diesel generator, consider going solar, going green. Make sure you include, whatever you do, the users in your process as early as possible. And also include them in your advocacy and outreach efforts. So these are some ideas how to get engaged. And I think now we have the first round of Q&A. And